Deputy Miranda Thomas would never forget that cold winter morning in February 2021. As she stood in the doorway of the spacious Idaho home, she watched a man fall apart before her eyes. At least, that's what he wanted her to believe. He would scream and yell, Thomas would later recall. But there were no tears in his eyes. At any point he would act like he was gagging. But nothing would ever actually happen. The man was Dan Howard, former Marine, former state trooper, a man who knew exactly how law enforcement worked. And in the bathroom upstairs lay his wife, of 26 years, Kendy Howard, dead in the bathtub with a gunshot wound to her head and her own pistol submerged in the murky water. "Dan, I know this is hard," Thomas said, her body camera recording every moment. "But when is the last time that you saw your wife alive?" Dan could only respond with what appeared to be unintelligible crying. Suicide. That's what Dan Howard claimed had happened. But as Deputy Thomas moved through the house, small details caught her trained eye. A packed duffel bag sitting in the bedroom, the clothes dryer running at midnight, filled with clean bath towels and bathroom mats. And despite the supposed shock of finding his wife dead, Dan Howard appeared freshly showered, in clean clothes, with visible deodorant streaks on his t-shirt. Something wasn't right. The woman everyone loved. To understand what happened that night, you need to know who Kendy Howard was. "She loved life," said her best friend Michelle Lampert, her voice breaking with emotion. "I have never had so much fun with somebody. No care in the world." Kendy was a small-town girl from northern Idaho. Sporty, outdoorsy, and full of life. At 22, she had married Dan Howard, a handsome state trooper 6 years her senior who provided the security she craved. They settled on 10 acres in the tiny town of Athol, just north of Coeur d'Alene, had a son together named Wyatt, and built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Over 26 years of marriage, they'd accumulated more than $2 million in assets from real estate investments in fast-growing Idaho. From the outside, they seemed like the ideal couple. They were affectionate towards each other, remembered neighbor Carrie Maitland. They were generally respectful to each other, but behind closed doors, the reality was very different. Cracks in the perfect image. The first major fracture in their marriage came years earlier, when Dan Howard was still working as a state trooper. He discovered Kendy was having an affair with a neighbor who happened to be Dan's good friend. In a blind rage, Dan confronted the man at his office. He threatened to, I believe his words were, splatter his brains all over the walls, recalled Detective Jerry Northrup, who investigated the case years later. Dan Howard eventually pleaded guilty to 2 felonies for harassing the neighbors and served almost 4 months in jail. He was allowed to resign from the Idaho State Police, and the incident marked a turning point in the Howard marriage. She was stuck to him like glue, just like glue, like hanging all over him. And she was never that way before, Michelle Lampert observed. "I think back, was she scared?" Years passed. Dan found work on the North Slope, the oil fields of Alaska, where he would work 3 weeks straight, then come home for 3 weeks. The arrangement changed everything. "She was free for 3 weeks," said Lampert. "That's when she really decided to experience life. And she didn't have to be under his thumb." While Dan was away, Kendy blossomed. She took spin classes, went to breweries with friends, and slowly began to realize there might be life beyond her controlling marriage. "She's very vocal that she does not love him, that there's no love in this marriage," her daughter Brooke Wilkins revealed. By early 2021, Kendy had started an affair, planned plastic surgery, and most importantly, had begun the process of buying her own house. She was finally ready to leave Dan Howard. 4 nights before. Just 4 nights before Kendy's death, deputies were called to the Howard home for a welfare check. Kendy's mother had heard her daughter sounding panicked on the phone and called 911 when deputies arrived. They found a nervous Kendy who asked to speak with them privately in the bedroom. What she revealed was chilling. "I asked for a divorce and he just got home. He's not taking it good," she told the deputy. "I think I had woke up in time so it wouldn't..." "Wouldn't what?" the deputy asked. "I know what I seen. I know what he was going to do," Kendy replied. What Kendy had seen, as she later told friends, was Dan standing over her bed in the early morning hours, wearing dark clothes and black latex gloves, with a pillow in his hand. The look in his eyes was one she had never seen before, a look that convinced her he was planning to kill her. The deputies helped Kendy leave the house that night. But somehow, impossibly, she returned home the next day. Dan had sent text messages, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. He was willing to work things out. She told friends and family that he wasn't stupid enough to try something again. Prosecutor Julia Schofstall would later explain that she felt like she had some level of safety. Kendy Howard was wrong. The night everything changed. The night of February the 2nd, 2021, Dan and Kendy Howard had a heated argument about splitting their finances. According to Dan's story, Kendy went upstairs to take a bath afterward. Later, he claimed he heard what he described as a thud. It sounded like something hit the floor or something. "I don't know," he told investigators. But incredibly, Dan didn't check on his wife for more than an hour. When he finally went upstairs, he claimed he found her dead in the tub with a gunshot wound to the head. "I don't think I've ever described a gunshot as a thud," said Detective Sergeant Ken Lalaton, who led the investigation. "I certainly would not expect someone who served in the Marine Corps, served approximately 20 years in law enforcement, someone who was a firearms instructor, someone who had been on their SWAT team. If anybody's going to know what the sound of a gunshot is from inside a residence, it's going to be Dan Howard." The truth emerges as investigators dug deeper. The evidence mounted against Dan Howard. The medical examiner initially ruled that Kendy had died from the gunshot wound, but something didn't add up. Forensic experts noticed there wasn't enough blood in the bathtub water for someone who had been shot while alive. Dr. Jennifer Nara, a forensic pathologist brought in to review the case, made a shocking discovery when examining the path of the bullet. "When I looked at what the trajectory was, the path the bullet took inside Kendy's mouth, I thought that was unusual because it was going in a slightly downward direction," she explained. Typically in gunshot wound suicides, they go either straight back to the mouth or go slightly upward. The bullet had torn through Kendy's tongue like a torpedo, which should have caused massive bleeding if her heart had still been beating when the shot was fired. And then there were the bruises. Kendy's body was riddled from head to toe with bruises and some lacerations, according to prosecutor Stan Mortensen. Her jaw had been broken. She had bruising on both sides of her neck, consistent with her being possibly choked. The grim truth began to emerge. Kendy Howard was already dead when she was shot. The perfect murder? How did Kendy really die? Prosecutors believe Dan Howard used a technique he learned as a state trooper called the carotid restraint, a dangerous hold that cuts off blood flow to the brain. If it's applied too long, it can cause death, explained Mortensen. And that right there was our theory on how Dan killed Kendy. After killing her, Dan staged the scene. He placed Kendy's body in the bathtub, shot her in the mouth with her own gun, and attempted to make it look like a suicide. Then he showered, changed his clothes, started a load of laundry with bathroom towels and mats, and finally called 911. But the staging wasn't perfect. That running dryer that Deputy Thomas had noticed. Investigators checked the manufacturer's information and discovered it had been started within a minute of the 911 call. Hardly the action of a man who had just found his wife dead. justice delayed. It took prosecutors 2 years to build their case against Dan Howard. In April 2023, he was finally charged with murder and released on bail with an ankle monitor while awaiting trial. As the trial neared its conclusion, Dan Howard made one last desperate move. After the prosecution rested its case, he drove to Spokane International Airport in what prosecutors believe was an attempt to flee. He was quickly apprehended and claimed he was only there to help a friend return a rental car. After 10 days of trial, 62 witnesses, and 8 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. At his sentencing, Dan Howard pleaded for mercy. "I love my wife and I miss her," he said, finally showing emotion. "I am not that monster I assure you that people have portrayed me to be." The judge wasn't swayed. "What we know beyond a reasonable doubt is that you strangled your wife. You murdered her. And then you staged her naked body in the bathtub, shot her through the mouth, and tried to pass this off as a suicide," Judge Lamont Barrett declared. "You killed a mother. You killed a grandmother. You killed a sister. You snuffed that out because of your own pride, greed, and anger." Dan Howard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The legacy of control today. Kendy's 12-year-old granddaughter Kenley treasures the glass chicken figurines her grandmother collected. When asked what she misses most about her grandmother, Kenley whispers through tears, "Probably her smile." For prosecutor Julia Schofstall, the case represented something larger than just one murder. "To me, this case was about a man who thought that he could control a woman, and if he couldn't get his way, he was going to force it." Kendy Howard was just days away from freedom when her life was taken. She had already met with a divorce lawyer. She was preparing to move into her own home. She was ready to start a new chapter. She wanted to just love life. And she loved life, her friend Michelle Lampert said. "I wish I could have stopped it. I'm still shocked that we're still talking about domestic violence, and that sometimes you can't do anything." The tragedy of Kendy Howard reminds us that the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is often when the victim tries to leave. In homes across America, behind closed doors, control can be a matter of life and death.